I view the wealth gap in our country and the world, but certainly here in the United States, as one of the biggest threats to our entire system. And so I view Bitcoin driving demand for US dollars through smart stablecoin legislation is a way to start chipping at it.
Welcome back to the show. Joining me this week is John Deaton. He is a trial attorney, CryptoLaw founder, and former candidate for U.S. Senate who was hoping to unseat Elizabeth Warren. It didn't happen. We have a lot to talk about. I want to learn all about that.
Okay.
But first, the market is crazy right now. There's so much chaos. So I just have to ask you, what's your reaction to everything that's been happening?
Well, I've been in crypto since late 2016. So after a while, you start becoming immune to this. But, we saw a tweet that was fake news, I guess, that President Trump was going to put a stay of 90 days to negotiate. And it was 2 trillion difference in the market in less than 10 minutes. And then it was reported that it wasn't true. It was just a rumor. And then back down we went. I think Bitcoin went from 74 to 80,000 in within a minute or two.
Crazy?
So it's crazy. It's turbulent times, but I'm a very bullish person. I'm someone who has 80% of my net worth. I disclosed that when I was running for Senate. So I'm kind of all in. So
80% in Bitcoin specifically?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, I want to talk about your backstory. I want people to get to know you because I've listened to some of your interviews and you have such a fascinating, interesting background. You grew up in extreme poverty. You grew up in a town near Detroit, right? Where cops wouldn't even go there because it was so dangerous. Your mom was shot or stabbed.
She was stabbed, yeah.
And it took 45 minutes for the cops to arrive because it was such a bad area.
Yeah.
And you wanted to overcome that because your mom basically didn't even think that college or excelling, becoming something successful was possible because of your status. So tell me about how that shaped you.
I was interviewed by Charles Payne when I wrote my book, and he said, what would you attribute a lot of your success and drive for? And I said, hatred of poverty and hatred of what poverty does. And part of that was my mom, who was my hero, single mother on welfare and food stamps, living in a place called Highland Park, which is inside Detroit. And there was a sign posted less than a mile from my house, probably 7 or 8 blocks, that said, enter at your own risk. Police do not patrol the area. And that was put up by the Detroit City Ordinance. And so it was that kind of environment. And my mother, one day when I dropped out of high school, just like all my siblings before me, because I had a 38 shoved in my mouth the first day of high school. So I dropped out and I couldn't find a school. It was pre-Google years, right? You can't Google nearby schools. And so I'm trying to find a private school that I can afford, and maybe they'll take payments from me if I get jobs. And about 3 months went by. I couldn't find one. My mother finds me just crying, devastated, because, my dream was to go to college and not just high school. And my mother said, why are you so upset, John? And I said, I can't find a school and I don't want to be a high school dropout. And she said, well, just do what your brother did, which is work till you're 17. She'll sign the papers and join the military. And I said, Mom, I don't want to do that. I want to go to college. And what poverty had done to my mother, who had born into intergenerational poverty, had a 6th grade education, said, I'm sorry, son, college just isn't for people like us. And a lot of people would think, oh, how could your mother say that? Well, if you lived her life, her parents were dead when she was 15, and she was born into that bad poverty. Education was never a thought. So that day I decided that I'm going to find a way. And for everyone out there, it just goes to show you how one person, an act of kindness, act of generosity, can change someone's life. I found a tiny Catholic high school in Royal Oak. It was about, I lived between 5 and 6 mile in Woodward, and it was between 11 and 12 mile. And the principal, I'm sitting there 14 years old, and I said, how much is tuition? And this was 1981. He said, $1,400 for the year. That's like 14 grand to me. It doesn't matter. And so, but he felt bad for me, but made me earn it. And he said, I'll tell you what I'll do, kid. I'll cut the tuition in half. $700 a year. You got to maintain a 3.5, play 2 sports, and be active in the church. And that's what I did. I got a job, washing dishes, eventually a host, and then waiting tables. And I began 16-hour days, catching a bus to that school and whatnot, and became the first person to graduate high school in my family, and made it to college and then law school. And here I am talking to you.
Wow. So you broke out of that. It's so fascinating how poverty, growing up with financial insecurity, it can go one of two ways. You either develop this mentality over time that you're not worthy, you lose your self-esteem, you lose hope, or it's been a source of great motivation and drive. Clearly it was for you, that I want to change my circumstances. And when I have a family someday, I do not want them to experience what I did. So tell me, why did you decide to become an attorney? What do you do day to day, and what caused you to want to run for office?
Well, the law impacts just about every aspect of our life, whether you're leasing a car, buying a home, anything you do, employment contracts, doesn't matter. So I was fascinated by trial attorney. One issue I don't have is public speaking. I like trying to convince people that my version of the truth is the truth. So trials sort of was an attraction of mine. And what's crazy is when I got to law school, I realized that I didn't want to go in the library and just research and write for some partner. I really wanted to be in the action, and ended up going in the Marine Corps, where I was a judge advocate for the Marine Corps and tried murder cases, homicides, rape cases, because the military is just a microcosm of society. 90% are amazing, outstanding people, but 10%, get in trouble and do things just like everyone in the civilian world. And so I got that experience there, and it was an opportunity to serve my country, which is funny because that's that path that I rejected as a child, that my brother took. Ultimately, I realized, and I wanted to serve in the military because when you learn my life story, Natalie, I am the embodiment of the American dream. And what's possible in a great country if you're given an opportunity, you're willing to work for it. And so I see that American dream dying, and decided that's what really got into it. I was complaining about people like Senator Warren, for example, when she announced that she was going to build an anti-crypto army, and her bill would ban the self-custody of Bitcoin. And it was like, okay, so we can only buy Bitcoin if we go through Larry Fink, right? Or we go through the Wall Street. That's not empowering individuals. And self-custody of Bitcoin is sort of the embodiment of freedom, if you will. And so, and I was thinking, well, we have illegal immigration, we have inflation, we have a housing problem, a housing crisis, we have foreign wars going on, all that real stuff. Why are you focusing on Bitcoin and crypto? Then she went on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd and said America was ready for a central bank, Federal Reserve issued CBDC. And George Orwell started spinning around in his grave. And then I just said, well, no one's really stepping up. I know the odds of taking on her, especially for someone who didn't have name recognition. No one knew me in Massachusetts. And I said, you know what? I'm going to stop complaining. I don't want her to have a free ride. So even though I'll probably lose, I'll do my best and stand on that stage and at least give it back to her. And so it was fun.
Coin Stories is brought to you by Genius Group, a Bitcoin treasury company listed on the NYSE under ticker GNS. Genius is on its way to hodling 1,000 Bitcoin in its treasury while educating the world on a Bitcoin-first future. Genius is launching the Bitcoin Academy with courses from Saifedean Ammous, author of the Bitcoin Standard. Join the launch waitlist via the QR code on the screen or the link in my show notes and receive the weekly Bitcoin Treasury newsletter. Genius isn't measured in IQ. It's measured in BTC. Next up, a quick word about my friends at Bitwise. They've been educating investors on Bitcoin for more than 7 years, have over $10 billion in client assets, and a team of 100 plus. Their weekly newsletter is a must read. It's written by their CIO, Matt Hogan, one of the best minds in the business. I highly recommend it. It's witty, bold, and quick. Takes just 5 minutes to read each week. So head over to bitwiseinvestments.com/CIO memo. And always, of course, carefully consider the extreme risks associated with crypto. Don't forget to join me in BTC Vegas this May and attend the 4th annual Women of Bitcoin Brunch. Use code HODL for 10% off your pass. Well, I want to learn more about that race. But first, going back to that idea of the American dream is dying. I was recognizing so many of the problems over the last 10 years before I learned about Bitcoin. And I pointed, like so many people, to politics. And I said, oh, we got to tax the rich and things are broken and maybe the government should come in and referee, maybe redistribute the wealth. I was so wrong because I didn't understand the money. And it was Bitcoin that connected the dots for me. But I would just love to hear your take on, you see the quality of life in this country deteriorating, people losing faith that their future will be better than the past, that their children will have a better outcome than they did. How did we get here? And what do you think is the solution?
Well, Bitcoin was part of the solution for me because I believe Bitcoin represented the new American dream. When I was young, the American dream was defined as like buying your own home, owning your own home, maybe buying some real estate, getting in the market. But prices became so unaffordable, people can't afford a home. And Massachusetts, the average home statewide is $650,000. Greater Boston area is $1 million for an average home. Regular people can't afford that. And so for me, Bitcoin, it was very personal. I read the white paper and I thought of my mom. I'll try not to get emotional, but I thought of my mom because she couldn't keep a bank account because she couldn't keep the minimum deposit. We got a welfare check and it was before direct deposit. So the mailman would come, give her a check, and then they would hit her with those fees that she eventually had to take it to the check cashing stores. If you ever go in the inner city, you'll see check cashing, liquor, lotto, those stores. And I remember my mom, I was 6, 7 years old, begging them, please don't take 20%, right? Please take 10% because we needed that money. And when I got to college and I tried to send her money for my younger siblings, if I sent her $100, I go through Western Union. They take 12%. So I thought, wow, you really can cut out the middleman, the predatory fees of the banks, the MoneyGrams, the Western Unions. And I thought about capitalism. I thought if you were in Nigeria and you had a smartphone, you could create a website and you could participate. You don't need a bank, right? So it could help the underbanked, the unbanked. And so it could spread individual capitalism around the world. Very attractive for someone with my background to feel that way. And then just like everyone else, I went down the rabbit hole. And then, now I'm 80% in. So I think that it has been an avenue for regular people to put a dent in the wealth gap. I really do look at it that way. The wealth gap in this country has increased every single year. You got career politicians like Elizabeth Warren who talk about income inequality and they talk about helping the poor, but they really don't. And their policies don't. And so I viewed Bitcoin and my path into crypto very personal and ideological. So.
Well, all these attractive qualities that you're listing out about Bitcoin, you would think that someone like Elizabeth Warren
Yes.
would be absolutely behind this kind of technology that is empowering for the working class, for the poor, the unbanked. So why do we have so many people, the wealthy elite politicians, who have not embraced Bitcoin? I mean, certainly the information's obviously out there. A lot of advocacy has happened to educate policymakers, but so few are like Senator Lummis, who are totally for Bitcoin. Why are folks like Elizabeth Warren so resistant? Is it really about control?
I was just going to say before you said the word, it comes down to that word control. Senator Warren and people like her, they believe in the nanny state, right? They believe in the government telling you, protecting you from your own judgment. They believe she wants 5 banks. And then she can control those 5 banks, or issue a CBDC, and the government can control your activities. If they control your money, they control your life. And so I think it really comes down to control and a resistance to any kind of change in the system. But, these are the same people who support the accredited investor rule. And the accredited investor rule says that you're not allowed to own private equity. So Kraken is going to go IPO, Circle is going to go IPO, but you can't own private equity shares unless you're worth $1 million and you can't count your home or you make $300,000 a year for the last 3 years straight. Well, you just excluded 88% of the American population. How does that lift people up? In Massachusetts in 1980, there was a new company that was going public. And the state regulators said, that's too risky for regular people. So when they IPO, we're not going to allow regular people to buy shares of that company. That company was called Apple. And $1,000 investment would be 1.5 million today.
Wow.
But they excluded regular people, and crypto, Bitcoin, right? That's a regular Joe can own that, and they can self-custody it, and they don't have to rely on a bank. You know, if you went to your bank and said, I want to withdraw $100,000, it wouldn't be that easy.
No.
Even 10,000 wouldn't be very easy. They're going to ask you, what do you got? What are you using it for? And why are you using it? And why didn't you order this like 2 weeks in advance? Just give me my money. It doesn't work that way.
It's my money. Wait,
right.
No, it might not be.
I bought a car, a vintage car for 19 grand, and the guy insisted on cash. And I went to my bank, and it was Citizens Bank at the time. I've since moved because of this experience, and said, I want 19 grand because I want to buy this 1972 Cutlass Supreme. It was like a little kid's thing, right? It was a car in my neighborhood that I said, one day I'm going to own that car. And oh my God, it took forever to get. I actually was losing my temper. Like, what do you mean you can't give me 19 grand?
That's
and
crazy.
That's how it was. But imagine that transaction. Okay, here's 19 grand worth of Bitcoin.
Easy.
And it's done.
Yeah.
Right.
It's crazy that Elizabeth Warren was calling out the bankers after the great financial crisis, but now she seems to have all of their endorsement.
Yeah. If you look at who wrote, everyone thought I was exaggerating. When I first announced, I said, especially the local media, like in the Boston area, I said, Elizabeth Warren is America's #1 bank lobbyist. And they're like, what are you talking about? She always criticized the banks. I'm like, who wrote her anti-crypto bill, which would have banned self-custody of Bitcoin? It was the Banking Policy Institute, led by Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan. So no, she loves the banks, and they love her because they want that consolidation, right? They want that the average American, depending on their services, their predatory fees and friction and all that. That's the opposite of freedom to me.
But right now, we do see some bullish indicators that Bitcoin will assimilate into the greater financial system, that even the big retail banks are going to eventually offer products. Maybe you'll be able to use Bitcoin as collateral. You'll be able to buy Bitcoin from the big five. How do you see this all playing out? Because Bitcoin obviously is this freedom tool, this freedom technology, this ultimate store of value that you probably should self-custody. I believe in that. But I think it will also be integrated into all of these convenient financial services that we have. How do you see it all?
Well, all I wanted was for the government to take its boot off the neck of the industry, right? Stop choke point 2.0 and allow banks to service people if they want. Allow Bitcoin to be used as collateral for fiat loans and whatnot. That's all I envisioned, and maybe have the politicians at least be neutral to it, because they were so against it, right? Like Gary Gensler and the SEC denying a spot ETF. You know, it took an appellate court to say that's arbitrary and capricious and violates the law. I would have never guessed that we'd have a strategic reserve where, you know, the president, which makes sense to say the 100,000, 200,000 Bitcoin that we have, we're going to hodl that. We're not going to sell it. Looking at the fact that had they hodled the other 200,000 they sold, it'd be worth 17 billion more than the government actually got. I would have never envisioned the president going a step further and saying, I want you to acquire Bitcoin in a budget neutral manner. And there are so many budget neutral ways to do it. How about, Natalie, when you pay your federal taxes, you can pay it in Bitcoin. You won't experience a capital gains occurrence by doing that. And we'll take, you know, a fraction of each person's federal taxes that are paid in Bitcoin, just a fraction, 0.5%, and put it into the strategic reserve. That's budget neutral. Selling gold, budget neutral. So I think that that coupled with the banks can now participate. Wall Street watching Bitcoin make moves over the weekends and extended hours, and they don't get to participate. They don't like that. So obviously I'm super bullish, right? I disclosed publicly in financial statements running for Senate that I have 80% of my net worth tied up in Bitcoin. So I'm an all-in guy.
Yeah, I mean, But most people aren't. So do you think that hurt you in some way? Because I feel like when we're in the Bitcoin community, everyone's on board with the same message. But when you venture out, we're still very early. People are afraid of Bitcoin. The woman you ran against, she says it's for criminals, right? So we're not there yet. So disclosing that and making it a part of your campaign, do you think it helped or hurt you?
Well, I was calling her. I think it ended up at first being a negative, like people perception wise, but I was able to flip it on her and call her the crypto candidate. Like, why is she focusing on Bitcoin? If you polled, the voters in Massachusetts, they wouldn't put Bitcoin or crypto in the top 10 issues in their life. So why are you focused on it? But I think you're right. A lot of people think we exaggerate when you hear the phrase "we're early," but when I talk to people, things that you were encountering in 2014, isn't that just used for criminals? Or I hear that Hamas uses it. When reality, Hamas said never use it because it's too traceable. It's a public ledger, right? So we do have an education thing to do, but with the strategic reserve and everything that's being implemented, the stable coin bill gets passed and market structure bill, all those things happen, then I think we're going to be able to start educating people, because people are not going to want to be denied access to this. We've come a long way from the FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried. I was afraid that was going to put back, sort of, let's say the Bitcoin adoption back a decade, and we've overcome that, I think.
I agree. This episode is brought to you by Casa, the leader in Bitcoin self-custody solutions, helping people like me secure their wealth with simple, powerful multi-key vaults. And now Casa is here to help businesses and even governments do the same. Introducing Casa Business, a secure, easy-to-use 3-key vault designed for small and large businesses with team signing capabilities and a web dashboard. Start your Bitcoin treasury the secure way and protect your assets. Get 10% off your Casa plan at casa.io/Natalie. If you use Bitcoin, you need a wallet that's fast, simple, and packed with features. That's why I love Speed Wallet. Send and receive Bitcoin or swap Bitcoin and stablecoins instantly. Shop gift cards, play games to earn Bitcoin, and explore mini apps. Download Speed via the QR code on the screen or the link in my show notes and use referral code CoinStories10 for 5,000 free sats. Next up, the Bitcoin way. Bitcoin is only freedom money if you control it fully. The Bitcoin way can help you learn the skills to properly secure your Bitcoin in 100% self-custody with zero counterparty risk. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Natalie to speak one-on-one with the best experts. Your security and sovereignty are priceless, so don't gamble with your future and peace of mind. I wanted to ask you about the lessons you learned running for office, because what I've heard is it just takes so much money, and the apparatus working against you has that to their advantage, right? They have a ton of money to throw at opposition. Can you talk to us about that experience and maybe what you would change if you could about this whole process? Because it doesn't seem fair that only if you have all this money do you get to actually make a difference and get in office.
Yeah, it's 100% accurate. I really do believe we should go. One of the few things I probably definitely agree with Bernie Sanders on is that this should be public funded, and each person, candidate, is given equal airtime and a certain amount of funding. I had $3 million. Elizabeth Warren had $25 million. Plus, I was trying to take out an incumbent like her. On election day, 49% of voters have still not heard about me because I didn't have enough money. And it's understandable why I didn't have enough money, because it's a very incumbent friendly system. The primary for me in Massachusetts was September 3rd. The general election is November 5th. So I had spent all my time trying to win the primary, and I did by 65%. But then a poll comes out that shows me down 24 points a month before the election or 2 months before the election. And it just hurts for fundraising. People can say, yeah, John, I like you. I love your story, and I hate her, or would love to see her lose, but I can't throw good money at a lost cause. So it really does discourage, I think, people from running. And it's a time commitment. There's no doubt. And you've got to be prepared to be attacked. luckily for me, I wrote a book, My Food Stamp Warrior, and I admitted to every bad thing I've ever done in my life. So
You got ahead of it.
yeah, I got ahead of it. There's nothing that can be found on me that's not admitted to in that book. So I kind of shielded myself from it.
But it's interesting. They still find narratives, right? Like that you tried to be the tough guy. You're trying to come out there, look tough.
I was for the Bitcoin billionaires. I was, there for the Bitcoin bros and all of that kind of stuff. The guy that's book is called Food Stamp Warrior. I was like part of the billionaire class. They make that.
There's a lot of gaslighting, and you've been a registered Democrat, Independent, and
I've donated to Democrats, Republicans. I really am independent minded, center right guy, liberally. I believe in a woman's choice to choose her own body. So I'm pro-choice and things of that nature. So definitely moderate socially, but I do believe the $36 trillion debt's a problem, things like that. Fiscally, but no, it is. We live in the thing I underestimated, Natalie, to be honest with you, was just how divided we are.
Really?
It really, even in the Republican Party, Rhino versus MAGA, purist versus pragmatist. And it's really sad, to be honest with you, how divided we are, because they're wonderful people. I would tell this to my young daughters who are more liberal than their dad. Just graduating college. And I would say, listen, you can disagree with President Trump all you want, but there are really good people who are voting for him. You know what I mean? And you can't indict people. You don't fall for this. There's two tribes and the other tribe hates America. Like, don't be bigger than that, be better than that. And they are, but.
How do you think we got to a point where people are taking politics to such personal levels that they defriend you? They don't, if they're family members, it creates strife within the family. They don't want to talk to you, or it's rising. I mean, you see what's happening with things like Tesla. I mean, people are committing violent acts because they just disagree with your political views. I mean, I used to not even know who people voted for, or if we talked about it, it was maybe a healthy debate, but there was no deep hatred for the other person because of their political views. And that seems to have changed, and it's really sad to me.
It is. I'll give you an example from the race, since you asked, that sort of highlights this, especially in Massachusetts, where it's overwhelmingly, there's only 8% of registered Republicans in Massachusetts. But I went to a log cabin Republican meeting, and log cabin Republicans are gay Republicans. And a gentleman came up to me and he said, yeah, John, I came out of the closet being gay 15 years ago. He goes, but I still have it as a Republican here. And I looked at him, I go, what? And he goes, yeah, we have a small business that's been in our family for 90 years. And if people think we might vote for President Trump, we'll lose business or there'll be vandalism. And I just said, that's got to be one of the most tragic things I've ever heard that someone would say. And I have learned that brother and sister don't talk anymore because of that. And I'll never understand that. And I don't know if it's the rise of social media and that people are allowed to be more toxic because they're hiding behind an avatar or whatever pretend name they have. But it's something that's got to change. I view the division in the country as probably the greatest threat to our democracy.
How do we heal that?
We heal it by trying to talk to each other. Like a lot of people, Morning Joe, when President Trump won, they were going to speak to President Trump, and then people were, bad mouthing him. Bill Maher just recently with Kid Rock went to visit President Trump, and Bill Maher has called President Trump every name in the book. But, you sit down, you break bread, you start really learning that, wow, this person may absolutely think the opposite I do from a policy perspective. But you know what? She loves her family. He loves his kids. They worry about the same things, health, financial independence, same things that we do. And I think if we get back to that, we'll start learning that we really do have a lot in common, more than we don't.
Yeah, get back to the human level. I really do honestly think that having a more fair monetary system based on rules will also help on a deeper level. Because I think that when I see people complaining about what's happening politically and socially, a lot of these things, if you really connect the dots, stem with the broken incentive structure at the core of broken money. The fact that if you are wealthy, if you're a big corporation, if you're a Wall Street bank, you have first dibs on that freshly printed money. And decades down the road, we have a system that has impoverished the majority of the country, who is now understandably frustrated. And understandably, they want someone to, get into office that makes them feel like they're going to change things and going to give them hope. But unfortunately, if we don't fix the underlying system, the money, I just don't see how we don't continue to get more divided. And that's why I feel like we're almost at an inflection point. And if I didn't know about Bitcoin, I'd be a gold bug. And I would say we need to return to gold as a neutral reserve asset. But because we have Bitcoin, I have more hope than ever. So how do you see, like on a geopolitical level, obviously you've seen what the reaction to the tariffs have been, but we can't be a strong nation with a strong working class and industrial base while being the global reserve currency that has to export all of our dollars and essentially run a structural trade deficit. Like those two things are incompatible. So why don't we move back to something like gold or Bitcoin?
Well, I think that we have to. If you listen, since 2000, we've printed 25%. Or no, we've printed more than that. We've devalued the US dollar by 25% in the last 4 years. If you look at all the dollars ever created, it's shocking, but it's like 80% of all dollars printed have been the last decade. So if the first 200 years of our existence, $1 trillion was printed.
Yeah.
And just during COVID, $8 trillion were printed over a period of a few years. You can't debase your currency to that level and not experience what we're experiencing, which exasperates the wealth gap in this country. And I believe, people out there, what do you think about climate change? And obviously I believe in climate change and all these other issues, but I view the wealth gap in our country and the world, but certainly here in the United States, as one of the biggest threats to our entire system. And so I view Bitcoin, crypto, this whole thing, driving demand for US dollars through smart stablecoin legislation, is a way to start chipping at it back. And we have to do something. The old way, you can't just keep kicking the can down the road day after day, year after year, election after election. We've had a continuing resolution, right, instead of a balanced budget for decades. Something's got to change. And so I don't necessarily agree with the exact implementation of the tariffs and all that, but there's no doubt we need a reset of some sort that needs to take place.
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you, your reaction to how the administration has been going about it. Because some people, even if they voted for this president, they're unhappy with what's been happening and they're nervous that we could end up in a financial crisis or a deep recession or, essentially another bubble popping. And this one is at the sovereign debt level. So how do you see this playing out? Are you nervous that we're going to take things in the wrong direction or execute on this in poor order?
Well, right now, I'm afraid that my biggest fear is starting to play out, which is in this country, we have a tendency to go from one extreme to the other extreme. And for example, if you take crypto, we go from Gary Gensler and Elizabeth Warren, right, to the Trump meme coin kind of thing, one extreme to the other. You need safeguards in place. You do need guardrails. You don't need no regulation. You just need smart, tailored regulation, for example. And something needed to be done. So I know that Trump supporters, right, are going to say, no, this is bold, courageous moves. And that's true. But two things can equally be true. The implementation and the execution is just as important as the bold move. So we'll see. I'm hoping that right now with all the tariffs, you have smart people like Ray Dalio and others, Bill Ackman, coming out and saying, listen, this is going to put us in recession. But I think that President Trump can turn this into a huge victory, right? Which is simply you have 50 nations calling, wanting to negotiate. That's his thing, right? Negotiating. So I would love to see, hey, I'm not backtracking. I'm just going to put a 60-day stay on what's going on or 90 days before we actually implement and then negotiate individual bilateral deals with Japan, with China, with Vietnam, and it could turn into a huge victory. We don't want to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. We have the jaws of victory before us, and I'm afraid that you can be too bold. Remember here too, is that a year from now, Natalie, we will be in full midterm election cycle. It's hard to imagine because we just finished one.
I know.
But
they come at you fast.
This time next year, it'll all be, and the Republicans have the slimmest majority in the House since 1931. And so all we do is one of those House or the Senate flips, we're back to gridlock.
Yeah.
And of course, 3 years later, we're in another presidential election. And if they go too far, then we could go right back to, the other side winning the presidency. And then we're just going to keep flip-flopping every 4 years. We need more stability than that. So
yeah, they run a huge risk. If they get this wrong, they're immediately going to lose the midterms. And I worry because there's so much at stake. And what they're saying about this being a national security issue is absolutely true, right? I mean, we can't have our adversaries making everything that goes into our military equipment, all of our medical, everything's made overseas.
it is.
And our workers haven't been competitive, and we have hollowed out the manufacturing, the working, the industrial base. But I guess I'm just skeptical because after studying other countries and, the history of money with global reserve currencies, there seems to be a pattern, right? You can't stay global reserve currency for too long before it does start really affecting the very people in your country. And who has benefited? The wealthy elite, the political interests, people in real estate and finance. We've just financialized the whole country. And so I don't see it as very, very easy to reshore everything. I would love to see it happen. But that's why I think you have to be so careful, because you could risk a total bust.
Yeah,
right?
but we can't live in the past either, which means we're never going to go back to the type of manufacturing, that we had in the past. And on top of that, you can't just overnight say, okay, before President Trump's last term, we'll be able to onshore all the manufacturing we want. It just can't happen.
No.
We don't have the infrastructure, the manufacturing infrastructure in the United States.
No.
And it's going to take several years just to try to develop that infrastructure. My concern is that companies say, hey, we'll just hold it out and we'll bunker down and there'll be a new president in 3 years. And we don't want that. I mean, President Trump has an opportunity to really do really good stuff. And I just hope that he does. He's not calling on me to advise him. And he's got great people. I mean, Scott Bessent, I think, is an amazing Secretary of Treasury. And I hope he listens to those folks.
Well, let's circle back to your bullishness. Why are you so bullish on the future? Why do you have a positive outlook when there's so much chaos all around us?
We could have never dreamed of what we just witnessed. I mean, let's just go back 3 years. 3 years ago, you had FTX blow up. You had Sam Bankman-Fried. You had Elizabeth Warren's bill that would be a de facto ban of self-custody of Bitcoin. It was doom and gloom. And now we have the President of the United States has told the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, a Bitcoiner, who just voluntarily talked about Bitcoin being a great store of value and digital gold. Literally, wasn't even asked that, and he volunteered that. And he tells Howard Lutnick, who is a Bitcoiner, who told Pomp that he had hundreds of millions of dollars in Bitcoin, soon to be billions. And Cantor Fitzgerald, his firm, is custodian of Tether and their reserves and owns up to 5% of Tether to go acquire more Bitcoin in a budget neutral way. So it's like telling two Bitcoiners that already believe, go buy Bitcoin, just don't make the U.S. taxpayers have to pay for it and acquire that. So it's hard to imagine that scenario when you take the Lummis bill and talk about it acquiring, I think it's 1 million Bitcoin or 200,000 Bitcoin per year for 5 years. And that's not only going to come out of committee, but they're literally talking about maybe having the votes. That's extraordinary. Never in a million years would I have envisioned that happening. Anybody that tells you, Natalie, that, oh yeah, I saw this coming 5 years ago. You could believe in Bitcoin just like I did, but you could never envision that kind of regulatory adoption and the custody of banks. There's no way that, Fidelity got in early or earlier than most, but Jamie Dimon can say what he wants about Bitcoin, but JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, they're not going to sit back and say, okay, we're going to sit this out. I know companies like Vanguard claim that, right? But they're not. They're going to see that there is a real avenue here, using Bitcoin as collateral, custodying Bitcoin. They don't want to be replaced, right? So they want to participate. And that's where you get sort of the adoption from the traditional players. I just don't want Bitcoin to become TradFi 2.0.
Yes.
That's what I don't want, because I want it to be that person being able to participate, in capitalism throughout the world, and someone saying, I don't need the banks. And someone saying, I'm going to custody my own. I'm not going to rely on a bank that could go bankrupt. I'm going to custody my own Bitcoin and participate in my own freedom. So I hope we never lose that.
Yeah, I hope so too. I agree with you. Are you going to run again?
I'll think about it, but I'll only run again if I really believe there's a path to victory. Now, Ed Markey, who's 80 years old, just announced that he's running in Massachusetts again for Senate. And listen, I'm not a young man. You could see I'm clearly not a young man, but first year he went to Washington, I was 9. So we'll see. If there's polling out there that shows that I can beat him, then I would do it, or any other race if I could win. I'm not going to do it just to do it. Elizabeth Warren, no one was stepping up. She was gaslighting America about Bitcoin, trying to deny a person's right to custody it. And it was more of, I felt compelled in that race, knowing the odds were stacked against me.
We need term limits. I know you've talked about it.
That was on my platform for one of the first things.
This has been really just wonderful to chat with you. Any final thoughts or any takeaways? One thing that I would love for you to maybe reflect on is the fact that you have achieved so much when you came from the situation that you did, which could have left someone saying, I will never achieve. I will never succeed. I will never be able to accomplish anything. And what message do you have for people out there that maybe will inspire them?
That you just really can never give up. And that if you have talent and you're willing to couple that talent with an incredible work ethic, it's going to take you longer than you probably want it to or expect it to. But eventually you'll achieve the success. I really believe it. I believe we live in the greatest country in the world. I believe it in my heart. Your birth and the circumstances of your childhood do not have to dictate your fate. That you can, but they'll be tough. Life will give you some things that will knock you down. But if you just keep persevering and keep fighting, then I think that you can achieve it. And it worked for me. And never underestimate what your own kindness and generosity can do. I did work my butt off, and I did, earn it. But if that high school principal didn't look at that 14-year-old boy and say, you know what, I'm gonna give him a shot. I'm not gonna give it to him. I'm gonna give him a break, but I'm gonna make him earn it. If he doesn't take that moment, take that opportunity to care, then I'm not sitting here talking to you right now, and I'm dead, or I'm in prison, or who knows where I'm at. But it's because of that one act of kindness that changed my life. And so be kind. I know that sounds cliche, and be generous, and don't judge everyone by their circumstances, because they didn't necessarily want those circumstances. That was the hand they were dealt.
That's a beautiful note to conclude on. You know what it makes me think of?
What's
proof
that?
Of work. Proof of work. John Deaton, thank you so much. I'll have your information in the show notes. I hope we get to do this again soon.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Coin Stories. Make sure you're subscribed to the show so you don't miss any new episodes. If you can, turn on those notifications and leave us a positive review. They really help the show grow organically with new listeners. We have a free weekly newsletter. Sign up at thenewsblock.substack.com. This show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should constitute as official investment advice, and you should always do your own research. I'm always open to feedback and guest suggestions, so please feel free to reach out at info@talkingbitcoin.com. I'll see you next time.